Very good. Good afternoon. The date is Monday, March 4th, 2019. Call it 3:34 p.m. This is the time for the monthly Transportation Commission. First order of business, I'll call roll. Ballard's here. David McKinney.
Here.
Ryan Lancaster.
Present.
Ryan Hall.
Here.
Tracy Hopkins. Absent. Stephen Lewis.
Here.
Ryan Leslie.
Here.
Tricia Matthews.
Here.
Michael Vennard.
Here.
Welcome. We'll give you a chance for a little introduction, Mr. Vennard, in a minute. Luke Kavanaugh is absent. Sean Martin.
Here.
Good afternoon, Mr. Martin. Tony Tisdale.
Here.
Miranda Carson. Absent. Brian Parker.
Stephen sitting in for Brian.
Stephen.
Yeah, Stephen Hunt.
Stephen Hunt. Welcome, Mr. Hunt.
Thank you.
Justin Price.
Mark Walsall, in lieu of. I think he's still in Chicago at the training course, so
All right. Thanks, Mr. Wasso.
you can get out of Chicago.
Okay. I missed anyone? Second item of business is the adoption of the agenda. Any items to add? Comments? Errors corrected? Mr. Lancaster?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
this is a question as much as anything, but would it be wise to talk about at least some of the staff communications before we do, let's see, 5B, the community programs priorities? It seemed like there was some discussion about that in the staff communication, if I am recalling that correctly.
So you'd like to make a motion to move 6C up to between 3 and 4, or 4 and 5, excuse me.
Between 5A and 5B, right?
Sure, let's go with that.
All right, you want to go 6C and put it between A and B at 5?
Yes.
Okay.
Is that,
Mr. Lewis, I suspect you're going to second that
Yes.
motion.
Second?
Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We'll move that up there. Lancaster, thank you. Any other items, housekeeping? With that, short motion to approve the agenda as amended. We are.
Second.
Second? Okay. All in favor?
aye.
Okay. Item 3 is the introduction of new Commissioner Michael Vennard. Welcome.
Thank you.
As have been our custom and practice over the last several years. We'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit why you're here and where you think you may be headed.
All right, hi, I'm Michael. I go to Rocky Mountains High School. I'm 16 years.
Red.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'm Michael. I go to Rocky Mountain High School. I'm 16 years old. I live in Vienna Woods. I've lived here for most of my life, over 13 years now. My father works in transportation, so I really thought this would be a good introduction into transportation. And I get to drive the streets every day, so I think I have a good view of the streets, and I drive often. I enjoy driving, and I think it would be a good opportunity to help others get from to where they need to be.
Very good. Michael, you say your father's in transportation. What particular industry or
Civil engineering.
civil engineering? Okay.
Noble profession.
Well, that's kind of near and dear to Mr. Lewis's and to Mr. Lancaster's heart. You may want to talk, I was going to say talk slide rule with them, but that shows you how old I am. Okay. Any other, does anyone have questions for Michael? He was here the other evening at City Council, made an introduction and commented that he had an interest in transportation. Specifically, so let's hope that we don't put any cold water on his passion. Welcome, Mr. Vineyard. We appreciate you coming on board. Approval of minutes from the February 4th meeting. I'll note that that draft appeared shortly before the meeting. I was about halfway through. If anyone got all the way through, Mr. Lewis, with your hawk eyes, usually you see if there's an issue with tour. Did you note anything?
I did not, Mr. Chairman. I would move that we adopt them as presented.
Any comment or questions for Mr. Lewis, or are we good to go? If so, I call.
I second the motion.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, minutes are approved.
Mr. Chair, just real quick before you move on, I do want to apologize that they were just here a couple minutes before you were this afternoon. It's not ideal, but I do appreciate you approving them today, and we'll get them to you in the packet next month. So.
Very good. Thank you. And Mr. Hood, time is as good a time as any is now, as so I made the presentation at City Council last week, and I was remiss in recognizing Mr. Hood. And again, I want to take this opportunity. He does a well of a job for us. That's whale with a W. Does a very good job, and I'm very appreciative of all your efforts, Mr. Hood.
I got 2 stars. I mean, it was a little bit after the fact, but I got 2 stars from the chair on Tuesday. Not to toot my own horn, but I do appreciate that. So.
Well, I had it underlined to recognize you, and if I'd had a second star, I would have picked that up. So, very good, sir. Thank you. 5A, Transportation Projects Update.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, so on page 4 of your packet this month, item 5A is Transportation Projects Update. As is per the usual, I've bolded any new information in this agenda item, and I will highlight a couple of projects, although if there's something in here or something not in here that you want to talk about, this is your opportunity to bring them up. The first thing I think I'll call to your attention is on page 5, and it has to do with Linder Road. So that project is getting going here. Road closures will be occurring on Linder, those 2-mile segments there on Linder. So just be aware of that here through the fall is when that project is supposed to complete. I will just also note, and it's not highlighted in your packet, but I found out today, 10-mile McMillan to Chinden. Costco is the one that's sort of driving this a little bit. It seems like they're trying to accelerate that project. So I know Sean's here. I don't think he has too much of a role in this, but one of the concerns has been having those 2 parallel routes under construction at the same time. So really hoping that, not that we don't want both of them done, but if that accelerates and they begin construction this summer, yet there's still things happening on Linder Road, that could be problematic for people trying to get around in that area. So we'll kind of keep our eye on that too a little bit, but I did hear that there's some motivation there to get that going, and then also construction on Chinden with that STAR agreement for the Costco project. So just a heads up on that one. See if I had anything else to call to your attention. We'll have a discussion here in a little bit on transit. So I think I'll probably save any comments I may have on that for when VRT, Mr. Hunt, presents on that here in a little bit on the agenda. The last thing that I wanted to call to your attention is the shared vehicles ordinance. So we've been talking about this, and in fact, the first time this was ever really discussed with the city was at this commission and Lime. was here and addressed you all initially, and that has been back to the council several times since. Most recently, the direction given to staff was to set forth a RFP, request for proposals, put that on the street, and select up to 2 vendors to provide that service within our community. So our finance department and, well, legal's been kind of leading it for the last couple months anyways. But that direction and getting the the RFP drafted has been in the works through our finance and procurement folks, and hope to hit the road with that shortly, with the goal of deploying on or around or even before Memorial Day of this year. So there's not a whole lot of information in the packet on that topic, but if you want to see any of that, I can certainly make that the ordinances, the draft RFP available to you here in the near future. So I think with that, Mr. Chair, I'll let you, the rest of it sort of reads for itself. So I don't know that I have anything else to highlight at this point in time, but again, I'd stand for any questions or any projects that anyone wants to discuss.
Very good. Any questions, comments, observations for Mr. Hood?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Leslie?
So Caleb, late last year I asked about the that pathway project from just east of Red Horse, going east towards Locust Grove on the north side of McMillan. And it said at the time it was going to be completed in December of 18, and nothing's been done since, looks like October, November of last year. It's still in its same status of incompletion. Do you have any updates on that?
So, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Leslie, I don't. In fact, I was under the impression that project had been completed. I've driven by there, but it's so constrained in that area. I'm not usually looking off to the north to see if that, but I thought through our Parks Department that was actually completed. Not all the way through the intersection at Locust Grove, but in front of that county subdivision there. The name of that subdivision is escaping me, but that gap between, we're on the north side of the road, correct? Isn't that?
Tustin is that subdivision, I think.
No, it's the county subdivision there. I'll pull up.
Oh, that real small county.
There's like 2 lots. They're larger lots, but there's 2 lots really where the gap was between Saguaro and the middle school and back towards Maverick in the intersection there at Locust Grove.
Right.
And then the newer subdivision has come online closer to the Locust Grove intersection over the past year, which leaves just 1 gap. I'm going to pull up a map just real quick if you guys will all bear with me.
So that section that goes between that county, small county subdivision and the Tustin subdivision in the city, that's just dirt and gravel. The asphalt just ends. Were they not going to asphalt it all the way through?
So again, Mr. Chair, my understanding was, and I haven't ground truth this, but I was under the impression that this was constructed here late, this winter sometime or even late fall. Dartmoor, I think is the name of the subdivision actually.
Yeah.
Right there. So, and again, this is the newer, I think this is Tustin, what you're talking about here, right?
Correct.
And so you can kind of sort of see it from here, but
So
that all is constructed to here, and I thought that this was in, but you're telling me something different.
were they putting asphalt down, or was it just gravel and
No,
dirt?
correct. I believe it was supposed to be hard surfaced, correct?
Yeah, there's no hard surface there.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I will circle back with Parks and see. I'm pretty sure it was supposed to be paved, so I'll circle back on that.
And then just as kind of a addition, Caleb, to the east of Tustin there, that little section between where the asphalt ends there and the corner at Locust Grove, that's even worse. That hasn't been graded or anything. It's rough, bumpy. There's nothing there. It's like a goat track kind of.
So, Mr. Chair, there isn't right-of-way there. That is private property in the county, hasn't been annexed into the city. It's still in the county. So that wasn't part of the scope of work, and that will leave that gap. I mean, I've seen kids, that Maverick's right there is an attractor.
Yeah.
So not real safe having that facility, the open waterway there, and then, yeah, people trespassing. to get across that intersection back and forth. So, but that's something that just when that property develops will require the sidewalk, or if ACHD does a project there, we'll get the sidewalk connection. But there's no real plan to improve that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments, observations for Mr. Hood? Okay, 5A transportation projects we'll call closed for this session. So we've moved up item 6C to the next item of business, staff communications.
So, Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'm going to kind of work a little bit backwards in item 6C, which starts on page 16 of the packet, and then it'll transition, I think, fairly nicely into 5B. So first, just to call their attention, Harvest Transit, there's a handout there, page 18. This was a one-page flyer that they brought to another meeting I was in last week or the week before. They had their highest number of ridership in December, and it really didn't taper off in January, although it wasn't any higher. But they're pretty proud of their ridership numbers and their hours of service and the reach that this service is providing. I will also note later this month they do anticipate that their third van should finally be constructed or built and delivered to them. So that should be operational here. March 20th, I believe, is the date I was given, but don't hold them to that because it seems like it's got pushed back a couple of times. But just wanted to let you all see those ridership numbers over the past couple, 2.5, 3 years that service has been in effect. And then again, with your permission, Mr. Chair, the topics on page 19, maybe just letting Mr. Martin maybe give some quick updates on some of those items, time permitting, that came up last month. I haven't touched base with him in the few weeks in between. I really don't know if there's much of an update on any of those topics regarding speed studies and the candles and some of the extension of some of those medians that were talked about last meeting. I did want to circle back on those at the end of the meeting, assuming we get through our the things we have to get through today, if that's okay. So we'll circle back to that list on page 19, if that's all right with everybody.
Very good.
Okay, so then kind of jumping in as we transition then from 6C to one of the things we hope to accomplish today. I did have 2 different conversations over the past month from parties that were interested in what would otherwise be classified as community programs projects. So I did put those in your packet for today. I don't know if this is Ms. Kane that walked in, so you have one of the folks that was here, a little bit of context, and Mr. Dearden, who I talked to about this topic, would like to address you as we start to get into those discussions on community programs projects here in a minute. But there's a little bit of background information on what you're going to talk about in the mile or 2 in between, south of Chinden on Meridian Road there by the Catholic school, heading down to the middle school, and so on and so forth, further down to the south on Meridian Road. And then the other topic that's there, and again in the same vein of community programs projects, is on page 17. And this was one that actually came into the mayor's office, and they forwarded it to me. This gentleman did talk to the mayor's office and has talked to Tim Kearns at ACHD. And this has to do, and I can pull up some, I've already got it up and we're in the neighborhood, so let's just go there. I talked with Steve, and I thought he was going to be at this meeting today, and he may walk in. But his request is for a crosswalk near the main entrance to Bridge Tower here. There's not, maybe I'll stay at this scale for a second. So we're between Linder and Black Cat, or excuse me, Linder and 10 Mile. And there's really no mid-mile crossing between those 2 arterial roadways. So his request is to evaluate the need for, or request a mid-mile crossing somewhere in this general vicinity of the Stake Center and Bridge Tower. So somewhere kind of mid-block to get onto the city's multi-use pathway system and into these neighborhoods that are on the south side of Ustick. So anyways, that's a picture to that request. And again, I thought he might be here today to express, at least anecdotally, why he thinks that's a good idea. But I have placed both of those then at the very bottom of your community programs priorities list for this year. So I know the format isn't super pretty there. It was just done in Word, but I'll clean it up before we send it off to ACHD. So that is staff communications, again with that caveat that let's circle back, time all permitting, to some of those things you've been talking about last several months, and we'll see what kind of updates there.
Okay. And with that, Mr. Hood, there was a request by Ms. Kane to address this, was there not?
There was, Mr. Chair, so I don't know if you want to transition into 5B then, or back into 5B.
Okay.
So as you recall, last month we made it through roadways and intersections, and so we have community programs to discuss this month. I guess I just wanted to quickly report out my conversation that I had with council last Tuesday as I shared your priorities for roadways and intersections. The first comment, I guess, is for me, but it's a heads up for you, because it kind of played out this way, where council actually liked the idea of discussing them one meeting and then another meeting. So splitting up, instead of having one massive spreadsheet of roadways and intersections and community programs, do one meeting and one the next, and sort of draw a conclusion to one and then address another. So I'll try to do that next year, and we'll tackle roadways and intersections first, and then do community programs last. And that's how they would prefer those recommendations to come to them too, is kind of one at a time and not just one big list of projects. So I don't know if you all have any feedback or want to do it differently than that, but that'll help me if you can kind of be my guinea pig with that a little bit, and we'll do one and then the other. So then I'll take whatever we do today for community programs and share that with the council next Tuesday. We have a deadline of March 15th to send our priority project request list to ACHD. So we really need to get this done today, so that the city council has a chance to review and endorse a final list. So the on page 12, the true list starts. I heard some comments last time, although we really didn't get into moving any of these projects around last month. But as we did with roadways, I don't know where this is going to go, but maybe bite-sized motions or individual motions to move something up, and then we can vote on that. Or if it's not too much, I don't mind 2 or 3 changes. But there does seem to be sort of a trickle-down effect on some of these that could change the order of priorities if it gets too convoluted. And then again, just at the end of that list, I added 2 new pedestrian signal requests that were talked about under the last agenda item. So for those of you that are newer, this list is sort of the other list. It's mainly sidewalks and crosswalk types of requests, but it can also be studies. It can also be just one-off lists with pathway projects or other partnerships with the highway district. But generally they're pedestrian, bicycle related. So yeah, it's probably just enough context for them. So you have in front of you a draft ranking from staff. It's largely the same year over, although I've had some conversations over the past year with, it's unfortunate Miranda wasn't here today, but a couple of projects that they've been tracking that have moved slightly this year as a draft to you all. But this is your list, so wherever you want those projects to go, I'm here to note that and then share that with the council.
Mr. McKinney.
Mr. Chairman, Caleb, when we were looking at the other list of projects, the major roadway projects, it seemed like the consensus was that really only the top 10 are being done in the near future, and therefore that's what we focused on instead of 40 or 50 or the total number on the list. On this list, these being smaller kind of bite-sized projects, what would be the similar consideration when looking at these?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner McKinney, it's a good question. I would say, yeah, don't spend too much time in the, mid-30s and 40s worrying too much about should this be 25 or 26. Top 15, top 20 are good. The bonus points, and I was just trying to look for my prioritization spreadsheet from ACHD. I wouldn't get too caught up on that with these. So definitely our priorities do count for something at ACHD. If you look at our list, though, some of our priorities aren't ACHD's priorities currently. And some of them that are our priorities, well, their priorities are maybe higher than we have some of their priorities. So they have some projects that they're planning on doing sooner that really are really low on our priority list. But again, to kind of answer your question the way I think you were asking it, top 10 get bonus points, and maybe even top 15. But I would request that, again, we do like kind of top 20 be pretty solid there.
Thank you.
Mr. Lancaster, I see there's a couple of school crossing zones in one or two in the top 10 and maybe in the top 20. Any comment there, or recognizing your efforts on your subcommittee, sir?
Yeah, well, Mr. Chairman, our subcommittee hasn't met for a few months. I do have several comments on the whole list, but I guess I don't know where to start with school-related, if you want to start there.
If you want to gather your thoughts, we'll get Mr. Lewis's
Okay.
input on what we ought to do. No offense.
Oh, please.
How do you see it, Mr. Lewis?
Well, my review of the community programs last time, I did, in my written comments to Mr. Hood, I did recommend that we consider moving draft number 7 up to a higher position. That's the East 3rd Street from Franklin to Carlton. As it's the in the comments on the right side, it is a priority to. I think it was Parks and Rec had requested that, if I'm not mistaken. It connects downtown to Story Park, and it provides a crossing of the railroad. On that side of downtown, there isn't much in the way of pedestrian facilities to get people north and south. And then tied to that was draft number 14, which is the extension of that northward from Carlton up to Fairview on East 2.5 Street. Other than that, I didn't have any comments to the rankings as proposed.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Sorry, I was just gonna, I apologize because Commissioner Matthews and Commissioner Lewis did comment 2 meetings ago. They did their homework, right? And so just to put a finer point on city staff draft number 14, that East 2.5 Street, Carlton Avenue, Fairview Avenue, Commissioner Lewis recommended that be up to number 10 was his previous recommendation. So I didn't hear him just now put a number to it.
That's right. Yeah.
But in his comments previously, he recommended that move up to number 10.
What would be the anticipated construction date if, on that 2.5 Street item? Mr. Hood?
So, Mr.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, if you look in the middle, kind of under current programming status,
Okay.
that's where it is right now with ACHD. So you can see that it's blocked out gray. So I would, by that meaning, it's outside of their current 5-year work plan. So you could say 6, 7, if not more years out right now. But that's as a number 14 priority. If we moved it up, maybe that, it says, if you look in the programming notes there, the second to last column on the right, it says scope to be evaluated and prioritized for possible inclusion in future integrated 5-year work plan updates. So it's on their radar. It just hasn't scored high enough yet to make it actually into their budget and programming.
because I was thinking that so they have cleared ground, rough grade for the subdivision going into the south of the Rite Aid complex, if I can use that term. I would think that that development would drive or call attention to installing curb, gutter, and sidewalks along 2.5 Street there. Just put it in a little brighter focus, if you would.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that is something that the city will require with the development of that parcel on 2.5 Street is the installation of curb, gutter, and sidewalk there. So there is some, and we've been talking, just if I may, been having some conversations with Cole Valley as well about the 3rd Street extension and what 2.5 Street becomes over time with the extension of a roadway there in that same block. Yeah.
When that subdivision is, you talk about being developed, I'm assuming sidewalks in front of that subdivision, but is the conversation to extend the sidewalks on either side as part of the, I'm using a poor term, the impact that that subdivision may have on the street?
So, Mr. Chair, no, we haven't had that, having them extend sidewalk any further than their frontage or on both sides of the roadway. We have had conversations with the Ada County Highway District on doing a project that way, thus this request. We can't require a developer to have those types of off-site improvements with a subdivision. So it would, but we are looking, again, in conjunction with what they do, now what happens on either side, and let's tie that in. A handful of years ago, if not more, there was an asphalt kind of path put in there. It's probably hard to see. So here's the block. Well, let me zoom out and then I'll zoom in. So there's Cole Valley, here's 2.5 Street, and then Fairview. So Rite Aid, and then Fairview's just off the screen here. So several years ago, ACHD put some asphalt down so you could get the connection to, between Fairview and Cole Valley. Oops, I guess we'll go Street View. You can kind of see the shoulder widen there, but there are some gaps then in the sidewalk infrastructure. This is better than it was before. But it's not the ultimate request of having the multi-use pathway connection, again, in this block between Carlton and Fairview. So. I will just, sorry, one more quick thing. We did have, when we talked to ACHD, the east side is not as easy. You can even see in this picture with the power poles and some of the other utilities in this corridor.
Yes,
It makes it really difficult on the east side of the roadway. So that's why the west side of the roadway seems to be more attractive for, at least you can get on one side of the roadway. But utility conflicts, drainage is another big concern out here. What do you do with the drainage in this area? But anyways.
okay. Mr. Lewis, if no further comments, I'll give the podium, so to speak, back to Mr. Lancaster then. Thank you
that would
for
be
jumping
fine.
in. Mr. Lancaster.
Mr. Chairman, I do have several comments that I want to make. I'm going to start with general comments and then get more specific, I think. But last month, I suggested that we make a wish list. Not necessarily this project priority list, but a wish list. So projects that can't necessarily be built immediately, but are still on the city's wish list. So again, I'm going to start this kind of general, but I will give an example here. So number one on the list, the Rails with Trails. we understand that that's a city priority, a city wish list, but it's not a feasible project at this point, and so we're wasting points by putting it on our list, especially number one. So that's my first comment is, let's put viable projects on here and perhaps keep a different list for wish list. My second comment is there are some projects on here that I don't understand how these seem to be community programs. They seem like roadway projects that are on the wrong list. An example of this is number 5, reconstruct Stoddard Road. So again, this seems like it's a roadway project, not a community programs project, which, having been on this commission for a few years, those seem like the smaller projects, sidewalks and the like. So a full road reconstruction seems like it's misplaced on this list. Third comment, I would like to ensure that this list stays as, I guess, needed projects and not just a list for whomever calls with a project idea. My favorite place to walk is between this place, and somehow it makes it to the top of our list. And I can give some examples of that. So, and then I guess fourth comment is there seems to be some repetition of projects on here. And I've probably got too many lists going here. I noticed that the numbering changed from last month, so I'm now looking at 2 lists, but. Yeah,
I'm going to interrupt Mr. Lancaster just real quick because I didn't point that out, and I'm sorry. So I didn't change any of the numbers month over, but I did resort them so that 19 shows up first. So that, yeah, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on in the 19 column before 18 was shown sorted first. And I thought that was confusing, so sorry I didn't point that out. So the lists are the same, it's just been resorted, renumbered with the draft 19 to be first.
Thank you for that clarification. So I guess with those general comments, if I can get into some specifics, Mr. Chairman.
Please do.
So number 1, rails with trail. I think for the reasons already stated that we should either move this way down on the list or remove it from the list altogether. Again, I understand it's a community priority, but not necessarily a viable project.
Mr. Lancaster,
Yes, sir.
objectively, when you say not viable,
Yeah.
a lot of effort has gone in to get this far, to start conversations. Is there something else out there that puts this way off in the distance or farther than what some people may think? I'm just trying to get a sense, and I'm not arguing.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've had discussions in this commission before, but as I recall, the railroad companies aren't willing to share their space. And in order to build it not in the railroad right-of-way means purchasing a slice of property from every property that adjoins the railroad. So, there's some. So that's why I say it's not viable right now.
Understood. Mr. Hood, is there, when we talk about rail to trail, is there particular sections, or is this a rail line that would parallel the Meridian city limits? So I'm talking about a 5-mile stretch then, I think.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, so right now, the way it's worded on our list is just 1, and it's about 8 miles actually, from Eagle Road to the county line. Our section of that would be about 8 miles. But you could parcel that out into mile segments or whatever. Doesn't seem like that's where Commissioner Lancaster wants to go necessarily, but, so, yeah, right now it's sort of a higher, bigger conceptual project. I will just quickly note, because it is happening, the first half mile is going in, designing and right-of-way and into construction, I think, in 2022. The first half mile segment that just is on the other side of Meridian Road to 6th, 7th Street there. But it is in the scenario you just mentioned. It's in easement and right-of-way outside of the rail corridor. It's adjacent, but it's not within the Union Pacific Railroad corridor. So I just want to make that note that the first half mile segment is moving forward with construction adjacent to the railroad corridor.
Okay, because if it's 8 miles long, I'm thinking a couple of areas. If you want to parallel in some fashion the rails, how do you get through the warehouses and the obstacles, and that's the wrong term, but already the infrastructure there? I'm thinking where the lumber ProBuild is, ProSource, on either side. You'd have to go a block over to get on the other side of those enterprises.
So, Mr. Chair, it's a good topic. Maybe I'll show you all the alignment studies that have been done. But to answer your question, particularly in downtown, the plan is for the pathway to actually deviate outside of the rail corridor and use Broadway to avoid some of the spurs, essentially until you get to about Locust Grove, and then you could get back adjacent or within the corridor and continue heading out. But there are quite a few spurs just in the downtown core here, and some wider sidewalk that's planned and exists on Broadway. So you use Broadway and the Hawk signal here in front of City Hall to essentially get people across the arterials at signals to continue on. So there is a plan, I guess is my point. We don't, I'll bring you some of those layouts for north side, south side, on street in those 8 miles, because it does vary.
Okay. Thanks for the interruption, Mr. Lancaster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You have other points?
I do.
Went from general to specific.
I did. So I mentioned this one already also. So number 5, reconstruct Stoddard Road between Victory and Overland Road. Unless I can be, unless I can receive an explanation for why this is a community program, it seems like this should come off of this list and perhaps go on the roadway list.
So, Mr. Chair, I can
Yes.
somewhat address that. So this list is the list we sent to ACHD. If you look at so let me scroll so everybody can track, right? The third column, you got CM, right? Those are our community programs projects. PPI, which I'm not quite sure what that stands for, but I think it's some pedestrian signal. And then RD, right? RD's a roadway project. So East 3rd is actually classified as a road project per ACHD. The evolution, though, of the Stoddard project is a community programs project that we put together saying, we really just care about the sidewalk. And when they scoped it, they said, you know what, we got to do something with drainage and curb and gutter and sidewalk while we're out there, and might as well widen the road while we're at it. So it sort of evolved out of a community programs request into a quasi-road project. But the initial request was because of the middle school there getting a complete sidewalk. And they said, well, while we're out there, might as well widen the whole road. So it does though seem to fit under community programs because that's how they're programming it. Right now, I don't know why, because it is a roadway project.
Yeah.
But I'm tempted not to take it off. But to your point, things like 3rd Street, that one maybe could be on our roadway list because that's ACHD's classifying as a roadway project. So look at that column as we're going down. Here's Linder Road, Franklin to Pine. And some of these, again, have multiple reasons. McMillan, a lot of the reasons to widen McMillan were pedestrian related and community programs. Well, they're going to do it when they widen the road. They're not doing it as a standalone community programs project. They're going to do it when they do the bigger roadway project. So a little bit of context on these were put together because of pedestrian bicycle needs. And ACHD's taken some of those and said, we're doing a whole project with them.
So that muddies the water a lot. All right. Well, I don't know what to do with that one then. On project number 3, Locust Grove Road and Palermo Drive. I don't remember exactly where that is, but I put in my notes, what is this connecting, and to move down. Number 6, and enhanced pedestrian crossing at 8th Street and Meridian Middle School. So it is too bad that Miranda's not here today, because I understand that this is a hot topic. We've seen some emails, or perhaps it was just our subcommittee that did, but as we can recall from previous meetings, Meridian Middle School seems to be a recurring topic. And I have a difficult time building infrastructure where perhaps a human solution, like a crossing guard, would be a better solution or a more appropriate solution. So along those lines, this is another kind of general comment. So I think we've become too reliant on pedestrian hybrid beacons to solve human problems. So particularly with school crossings. So I've commented on numbers 1, 3, 5, 6. Number, let's see, 9 on the 2019 list and 15 on the 2018 list. So this is West 2nd Street. So as I recall, this is adjacent to the Meridian Food Bank, and we had a presentation on this a few years ago, where the description says build a sidewalk to address a parking concern. My question is, how does a sidewalk address a parking concern? So I know we added this to the bottom of our list several years ago, and it seems to have worked its way all the way up to here. So if the concern is a parking concern, I don't think we need a sidewalk, so I suggest moving that one down. Number 10 on both lists, I have the question again, what is this connecting? Numbers, so I'll stop when I get to about 15 here, but numbers 12 and 13, my comment again as far as why is this a community program? They say widen Eagle Road, widen Linder Road, so again, they seem like road projects. And then numbers 16 and 17, they look like the same project, and I wonder, so they're signalized pedestrian crossing part of Rail with Trails project. So whatever we do with number 1 on the list, the Rails with Trails, I suggest we do the same with those. So those are my comments on numbers 1 through, I guess, 17 from last month's list. I hope those match up with this month's list. But are there any of those that you'd like me to go over again or discuss, I guess?
Questions for Mr. Lancaster?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lewis?
to build on the theme of roadway projects appearing on this list, I actually did find 2 of these community program projects that are on the roadway list. The draft number 12, Eagle Road, Amity to Victory, that was on the old draft number 7 roadway. I'm not sure where it landed finally, but it started at number 7. And then the draft 13 community program, Linder Road, Franklin to Pine, that one was draft number 3 on our roadway list. I don't believe I found any others easily that were carbon copy duplicates.
So again, Mr. Chair, if I can just address that real quick. We can certainly pull them off of here because like you both pointed out, those are moving forward as roadway projects at ACHD, both on our roadway list and in their programming. So I'm comfortable taking them off, but if you just look at the history of those both evolved or came to be because of the pedestrian needs there, not so much the roadway needs. It was about connecting the communities via sidewalk, and that's why they're on the community programs list. And again, that scope has been amended to say we're doing a roadway project, and yep, we'll put in sidewalks when we do that. So that's why it was on this list, is because it showed up here before it showed up as a roadway need. It showed up as a pedestrian need. But I'm comfortable taking it off because it's being tracked as a roadway project now. There's another one, again, on the list, number 7, that I don't think, I haven't looked, but Mr. Lewis looked. Number 7, East 3rd, Franklin Road, Carlton Avenue, Phase 1. I don't know that that's on our roadway list, but that's the only one I see on our community programs list that is also a roadway project at ACHD. If if we removed 12 and 13 just completely off the list, and then tracked draft priority 7, the lone remaining roadway project, well, depending on how you look at that, per ACHD, the lone remaining roadway project, Stoddard, I guess, could qualify too. There wouldn't be any other quote-unquote roadway projects on our community programs list.
Mr. Lewis, would that be a recommendation that we should make?
Yes, I move that we delete numbers 12 and draft number 12 and 13 off of our community programs list.
Your second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that's our recommendation then, Mr. Hood. I appreciate that. Joe, any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, Caleb, I'd like to backtrack a minute. I know this isn't about community projects, it's more about roadway. And I just wondered, is the city or priorities taken into consideration for this Project Bronco on Franklin?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Matthews. So, sort of, I guess is the answer. There's not a lot we can do as a city and a project happening in another city that's in another county. We have had some conversations with ACHD and hoping to get them to the table a little bit more and requiring some things on this side of the county line. Certainly some of the impacts will be felt on this side of the county line. We didn't necessarily knee-jerk with the section of Franklin, though, that's unimproved currently or under-improved on the Ada County side, knowing that there's a big project going on just on the other side of the county lines. But I know it's something that is on ACHD's radar and the cities, but Franklin serves a bigger purpose than that. It is a detour route for the interstate. Mm-hmm. So again, to answer your question, sort of, we aren't able to really insert ourselves into those negotiations and conversations, but we're aware and we're having some conversations, again, with their agencies.
Okay, just curious.
Mr. Chair, if I can, just real quick, I just will remind you, we do have a guest that would like to address, and maybe before we finalize that, hearing from her about why she's here today and would like to address you, maybe before we go any further.
I have one quick comment.
Sure.
Martin, is it a fair comment to say stay tuned on the Project Bronco?
Yes, I think that's a fair statement to say on that. You not only have Project Bronco, but you also have Highway 16 corridor, which ITD is also in the planning stages of. So there's going to be Franklin is going to need to be improved from between Black Cat and McDermott one way or another in the future. Just a question of timing.
Okay. Stay tuned.
Yep.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, excuse me. Go ahead, sir.
I just wanted to add my perspective on a comment that Commissioner Lancaster mentioned. Mentioned about pedestrian infrastructure and how he felt that, you know, that's not necessarily, that we can achieve pedestrian safety or movement of pedestrians without infrastructure, like with a crossing guard or something. And my feeling on that is that I really think the pedestrian infrastructure is needed. Crossing guards are not a solution. They're not a long-term solution. And they're not really the most prudent one, nor the safest. I mean, pedestrians and bicyclists and scooter riders and everybody not in an automobile has been pushed everywhere off of the roadways since Robert Moses started designing streets in New York City. And we really need to have more of a focus on the vulnerable road users and for providing the infrastructure for them. So that was the only comment I wanted to make.
It's a fair comment, but I have observed too many pedestrians crossing 5 or 6 lanes without knowing how safe or unsafe they are.
Maybe if
And
they had
it's a challenge to, if I had my way, there'd be skywalks across the roads. It's the only way you're going to keep them safe. But it is a challenge, and it bears some thinking about how those 2, 3, or 4 modes can be compatible. And it seems like it's a hard conflict.
I think the signalized crossing is a good start.
Very good. So, Mr. Lancaster, before recognizing someone who had asked to address us, do you have any votes for resolutions, or where would you like to go, sir?
Well, I am okay with a presentation anytime. I mean, it's up to you, Mr. Chairman. I think I would like to explore, let's see, if, you know, by explore, I mean, if Caleb could put them on Google Earth on our screens, I'd like to see numbers, and this is whenever you want to do it, if you want to do it, Mr. Chairman. Numbers 3 and 6 and 10. I'd like to explore a little bit more as a group, if you will. But I would also, I guess I can do this now, I'd like to move that we move number 1, rails with trail. Well, move it to where? Either off the list or down on the list. I just down somewhere. I move to, let's move number 1 to, I don't know, number 20 on the list, so Rails with Trails project.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
before we make some of these decisions, I think it would be good to have all the information all kind of in the mix together. So I think it would be wise to let our visitor bring their concerns to the table. That way we can have everything to consider these new items along with the existing items and kind of do it all at once rather than piece by piece.
And I would entertain that, and in that same vein, I would also ask if, rather than, if we would also recognize some time for Sergeant Arnold to give his report, rather than tying him up here for the next hour. Have Ms. Kane do her presentation, and then, and I know that that's kind of reinventing the agenda, but.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If that's how the commission would like to proceed, then I'll hold my motion for later. So I'll rescind my motion for now. How about that?
Been waiting to tell you to hold for a minute. Okay. Ms. Kane, if you would approach the podium, and we ask you to give us your name and state your address so we know, not just for the record, weigh in on your connection with the city, please.
Great. Hi. My name is Andy Kane. Thank you for giving me some moments to address you today. I'm the principal at St. Ignatius Catholic School. We are at 6180 North Meridian Road is the location of our school. It's on the corner of Chinden and Meridian Road.
Very good. So we've read your concern there about the students crossing Linder Road. Give us a little more information. if
Sure,
you would,
crossing
please.
Meridian Road. So we opened last year, was the first year that our school was in existence, and no, I don't think anyone anticipated that we'd open with so many students. Last year we had about 400 students. We're up to 450 this year, and we anticipate by next school year being at about 470 students. Many of our students live in Paramount, so the only safe place for them to cross Meridian Road is at the Hawk at Heritage Middle School, which is about a mile down and then back, or at the corner of Chinden and Meridian Road, but there's no sidewalk returning. So in order to cross safely there, they have to walk in the road to return back. So we're looking for some ideas or from some solutions to get our kids safely across Meridian Road. Our front office receives a phone call almost about once a week on average from community members, not our own parents, from drivers driving the road who see students crossing unsafely or who are nearing an accident. We did have one accident a couple months ago on Meridian Road caused by one of our students trying to cross. No students were hurt, thankfully, but there were 3 cars involved in that accident.
Okay. Mr. Lancaster, so Ms. Kane, Mr. Lancaster chairs a subcommittee on school zones, and didn't know, and that was the earlier comment, if that's something that he would consider, but your ask then is what may be done on,
What might be done to help our students cross safely?
okay, all right,
Meridian Road.
all right. Mr. McKinney?
Yes, and maybe I'm trying to get an idea of what number of students are crossing Meridian Road on a daily basis.
We're
Do you have a
estimating
number?
about 50 by bike or on foot.
Okay, so 50 in the morning, 50 in the afternoon?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Martin, is there ACHD relative to the intersection of Meridian Road and Chinden? Is there some distance that you would see crosswalks away from that major intersection?
Commissioners, President Ballard, typically we just try to install crosswalks where they're going to be used, where the kids are crossing. That distance, if you put it at that first street, I think it's far enough away. It looks like about 1,000 feet away or so from Chinden that I don't think it'd be an issue.
Very good. Mr. Lancaster?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if I can ask a question to our presenter.
Please do.
Okay. So thank you for being here, Ms. Kane. About your school, just a question about it. So what kind of school is it? Is it it's not a West Ada school. Is it a charter school? Is it a private school?
We are a private school.
Okay. Okay.
Don't confuse the First Amendment. I'll make the other argument.
Okay, no, that's helpful. And you said you have about 450 students currently, and is that expected to continue to grow?
Currently, yes. Our max capacity is 480 students.
Okay.
So we'll be pretty
almost there.
close next year.
So, and then one more question, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay. But what are the grades at your school? Is it kindergarten through something, or is it high school, or what?
Preschool through 8th grade.
Okay. Thank you. Those were my questions, Mr.
Very good.
Chairman.
So no, I understand the need to get the students to and from their place of education.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Lewis?
Just a question. Was there a traffic impact study prepared prior to the school opening?
There was a traffic impact study conducted.
And did it have any recommendations for school crossings on Meridian Road?
I believe the study asked to reevaluate after we opened. They anticipated we'd only have 50 to 100 students at the start.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Martin, is there any studies that we might request?
I guess you could start, if you wanted more information, you know, you could always start with just a pedestrian type study where we would go out and count how many pedestrians are actually crossing there, if it was kind of data you were looking for, available gaps, that kind of thing.
Okay. Sergeant Arnold, I know it's not your turn yet, but do you have any information relative to this issue?
You know, I don't. I was actually on the crash that she was talking about. And I know that there was a student crossing, and that's what caused traffic to slow down. But the real cause of the crash was distracted driving.
Okay.
The driver not looking at the road, looking down. I don't know. I think it was his radio, if I remember right, and drove 40 miles an hour in the cars in front of him.
Very good. Mr. Lancaster, I didn't mean to be quite so quick, but I know where I spent the first 8 years of my education in a school similar to that. So, Ms. Kane, I think what we're coming up is some steps that be taken. At least our recommendation is to get you some information from ACHD as to a pedestrian count, and they're aware of the situation, and start this process to see what can be done to get a crosswalk at that. Let me ask, was there a different ask that you had for us, or a different request that you wanted to make? Or, I don't want to say is that sufficient, but start some of the process.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I did think of one more question for the principal, if I may ask.
Yes.
So before we excuse you, but, and maybe you already said this and I forgot, but approximately how many students are crossing from the west side of Meridian Road to the school?
We anticipate about 50 in the morning, about 50 each day, 50 in the morning and the afternoon.
All right. I apologize if you already said that, so thank you for the reminder.
Mr. Martin, do we need to put that in a formal request, or is our conversation here sufficient?
No, what we have here is sufficient. I could take it back.
Okay. Mr. Hood, did you want?
Maybe just to explore that a little bit further. So you don't have to decide this now, but when we get to having all the information, again, this as a project is already listed at the bottom of the list now. We don't have to necessarily define the location. I don't even know if you want it on the list, though. I guess that's why I bring it up. So if you're going to move it up, we could still leave it open to producer and director, I think, are the two roads, right?
That's correct.
There's one kind of right at the mid-mile, and then one that's alignment with the driveway into the school itself that maybe, I don't know, I didn't measure it, 800 to 1,000 feet or so south of. If I can, Mr. Chair, just while I've got, what location seems to make the most sense from Paramount? I mean, the kids, seems like just ratios, there's going to be a lot more families that are down here that may want to cross here, but this seems like a better location because it ties right into the school. And you do have these, so there's missing sidewalk here. So it does seem to make some sense to cross kids here and have them use the sidewalk that's on the east side to get to the school. But as Mr. Martin said, kids are going to cross kind of where we're not going to probably get them to backtrack, right? It's so I guess just from your standpoint, what
our students are
data,
crossing there. That one. They're crossing at that one. That's where the accident occurred. That's where we're seeing them cross. There's another road just coming out of La Mirada that's just a teeny bit past that, right there, that I think would also be sufficient. I think if we moved it much more down, like you said, I'm not sure our students would use it, but certainly if it benefited the community and we could, it would be safer. It would be a safer option than what we have now.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Leslie?
So Sean, you said if that is, in fact, about 8,000 feet to director, that would be okay. ACHD wouldn't have an issue if the counts necessitated it, putting in a a hawk signal there?
No, I think that's far enough away if we were to put it at Director on the south leg there.
Okay.
Anything else for this item? Ms. Smith?
Mr. Chairman, will there be no impact from commercial development at the corner of Meridian and Chinden that would be detrimental to installing something at that Director Street intersection? I don't know where the approaches to that development are going to be, but
I think that's residential.
that corner?
Actually, I could answer that. I know I'm not testifying here, but the reality is that's a residential development that's part of the,
Okay.
what's it called? It's part of the Paramount subdivision, sort of, but it's the senior
Cadence?
55 active community.
Okay.
There are no access points from that to Meridian Road.
Great.
So it's all homes and it's all,
Okay.
they're working on it right now, but there's no access points.
Okay. Good to know. Thanks.
Anything else for Ms. King? Well, Ms. King, thanks for visiting, and always a standing invitation to come back and visit us. I appreciate you coming in, and we'll see what Mr. Martin and his group can do to help out the students.
Thank you for your time.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. McKinney.
before we go back then to considering everything, the kind of the one question that's been stewing around in my head as we've been discussing this is now the question is, what's our criteria for determining if we want to put this item on the list for, a crosswalk with a signal at Director Drive along Meridian Road? The question is, how then do we prioritize it and know where to put it on this list? Because as I look at the list that we have of these community projects, crosswalks and sidewalks and so on,
Sure.
it's not clear to me that I can see which one deserves to be at a higher priority compared to the others. We've got a crosswalk here that's likely to have 50 or 60 crossings each morning and each afternoon. How does that compare to the other ones that are also on the list where they want crossings? And I guess that's just kind of my question of how are we going to figure out where to put this on the list? I think it ought to be on the list.
Okay. Mr. Martin, can you help us out on any numbers as to, I know it's hypothetical, but if we assume that there's 50 to 60 crossings there, what drives the decision to put a crosswalk number-wise, if that is the relevant criteria?
Typically, school pedestrian crossings, I would say, are thought of in a little higher regard or a little more needed maybe than some of the rest. Especially like a number like 50 is a pretty significant number. If you look at the MUTCD, it suggests like you need something starting with around 20 pedestrians if you're looking at like a pedestrian hydrant beacon or something. So obviously we don't have numbers at every single one of these requests, but I'm thinking like a school crossing is probably going to have a higher number of kids, and the age of the pedestrian, obviously, I would probably take into consideration as well.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lewis?
the other approach we could take is to leave both of these at the bottom of the list until ACHD finishes their scoping of the two intersections and seeing, their pedestrian counts and if they meet the crossing warrants, and then what type of crossing treatment is most appropriate, whether it's a pedestrian hybrid beacon or an RFB or crossing guards, whatever the answer is that comes out of the scoping study.
Okay. I would have another question for Mr. Martin. If the scoping study makes a recommendation for a crosswalk, are you waiting for further authority or somebody to make a request, or is that something that the highway district just goes, okay, we recognize it, we'll put it out there?
It depends, I guess, on what the recommendation is. Something like a crosswalk with paint and signs on a lower volume type roadway, we would just go out and do, since that's minor, as long as the pedestrian ramps and those kind of things are in. Once you start getting to arterial roadways and you're probably talking about something more protected than just a crosswalk, and signs, where you're talking about some kind of flashing element as well. Well, now the cost just went up a little bit, so now you're probably going to have it programmed where it's going to compete with other projects.
So, Mr. Lewis, with Mr. McKinney's comment, and I think they're kind of combined, do you have a motion?
Yes, I move that we add them to the list where Caleb has them at the bottom until the scoping is complete.
Mr. McKinney, does that work for?
In the absence of other information, it's hard to know exactly what to do otherwise. So even though, you know, in reality, I look at them and I say they probably, you know, their priority is probably much higher than 46 and 47 as priority numbers. But not knowing what number to give them, yeah, there's probably not much else we can do at the moment.
Okay. Would you second Mr. Lewis's motion?
I'll second that, yes.
Okay. All for the vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
All right, so we have two, but I think the yeas carry. So Mr. Martin, time-wise, are we 30, 60 days out for that report, or 90 days, or?
Probably depends a little bit on the weather, a little bit on spring break. Obviously, we try to count pedestrians when the weather's nicer, because kids are more likely to walk. But because of spring break coming up too, I'm guessing it'd give us at least a couple months.
Okay, so probably maybe the June meeting then, I would take it, May, June meeting?
Definitely by then, because school's going to be out, you know, into May, so
Okay.
we definitely have to do it
Yeah,
before that.
You'd have information, and at a June meeting, we could hear the results. Okay, so,
Chairman, I'd just like to get some context to my name on that.
context to your name?
Context to my name, I think it should be, at least, not started at the bottom, but started, you know, like 20, just, because we only do this once a year, this prioritization, and it's a school crossing, young children. That's the context to my name, I just wanted to throw that out there.
All right, so we have a motion that was approved. Are you revisiting the motion then? Okay. I guess I'm a little confused. So if we come back and say June and it looks like it's a go, then we're going to ask them to do it, or just say, well, let's put it high on
No,
the
I
list?
say we just, if it's gonna be done, it gets done, but I just want to give some context. I think it should be higher on the list to start with, because we only do this prioritization once a year.
All right. Mr. Lancaster opened Mr. Lewis opened a couple, both of them opened a couple of holes by taking 12 and 13 off the board. You make it a new 20? Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm not saying that. I'd like to see what the Ada County School District does.
All right.
Because it could be a moot point. If they decide to put it in, we're not even talking about it next year.
All right. All right. Okay, we'll wait to hear. And before moving on, did we want to bring Mr. Arnold off the bench before, or Sergeant Arnold off, and let him do his report, and then he can get back out to doing what he does best?
Crushing crime.
Good afternoon, Sergeant.
The only thing I really have is pretty short and sweet. I had received a request for a speed study from an HOA on Wrightwood, just east of Locust Grove. I know that we've had speed studies done in the past out there. Most of them we found most people have been around 22, 23 miles an hour for an average speed through that area. The same person's calling again. They're on the HOA, and they're asking that we conduct another speed study because they believe that traffic is again moving at high rates of speed through the neighborhood. And first thing we'd like to do is see if it is in fact doing that, and if it is, what times of day that's occurring, so that we can start doing some traffic enforcement.
And you would make that request on your own, or do you need us to?
I'd like that to come through the commission to ACHD.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Leslie?
So Sergeant Arnold, you said several speed studies have already been done there?
We've done at least 2 that I can think of over the last probably 4 years.
That's what he said.
And neither one necessitated
Neither one really came up with anything.
Is this a fully developed area, or are there new homes
It is,
going
it
in?
is, and there's more homes going in, and that's why I think there might be more traffic in the area now, because they have added several dozen more homes in the area. And I think one of the streets actually connects all the way from Locust Grove now to Eagle Road. So there may be even some cut-through traffic that's utilizing that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lancaster,
I have a question for Sergeant Arnold. So,
please do.
Sergeant Arnold, we have a dumb question on this side of the room. Where is this road that?
It's
Well, let's
Locust
find
Grove, Locust Grove south of Victory.
South of Victory.
Yeah, almost to Amity.
Keep going, Caleb.
Let's see. If we go a little bit further south,
There it is.
right?
South of the canal.
Yeah, I'm pointing at it like you can see that, but right there. So there's another subdivision just to the south of Wrightwood that's has actually quite a few homes in it now.
Sergeant Arnold, if I may ask, do you recall what the previous speed studies showed?
Yeah, it showed quite a bit of traffic in the area, but most of the traffic was well within the speed limit, 22, 23 miles an hour is what we came up with on the last speed studies.
And so is this just, you say it's an HOA that asked for this?
It is.
Okay.
No.
Other questions for Sergeant Arnold? Mr. Lancaster?
I don't have a question, Mr. Chairman, but I just want to ensure we have the right information to get to Sean to make a request as far as location on, I mean, is it everywhere on Wrightwood? Is it east or west?
It's to the east of Locust Grove. Seems to be the biggest problem. The area to the west, we've never had a complaint of speeding traffic. There was some traffic up further in the neighborhood to the west, farther in, but after I talked with some people there, they decided it really wasn't as big of a deal as they thought it was. But it seems to be that Wrightwood to the east.
So if we need something official, Mr. Chairman, I'll move to forward on Sergeant Arnold's request, if we need that formality.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Second. Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay, ayes have it. Mr. Martin, may we request a speed study there on Wrightwood? Was it about a quarter mile to the east, sir?
Yeah, somewhere in that. I'll leave that up to the people that put the
Okay,
hoses out, what they think would be the best location, but somewhere along that straightaway.
very good. Said you didn't have much on your plate, but we got that accomplished for you. Anything else to discuss with us, sir?
I think that's it.
Okay,
All right. Thanks, everybody.
thank you. Be safe. All right. 6A, moved that. So now we'll get back to roadways, intersections. Mr. McKinney, you had got us, or excuse me, your last comment, but I think that's a good place to jump back in on where we go with our ranking on these community projects.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Lancaster.
I've had brought up the idea before our presentations of looking at numbers 3 and, what was it?
6 and 10.
3 and 6 and 10, a little bit more.
Okay,
If we could do that, if that's the will of the commission. The
Mr.
chairman.
Chair, just happened to be there with this map that's on your screen. So this is Palermo Drive. A little bit of context. I have not verified it this year, and again, Miranda's not here. Historically, kids in this subdivision actually go to Sienna. So the request was for some signal to get those kids safely across, some protection across Locust Grove at Palermo to walk to and from Sienna. So that's, I don't know if you want any more than that, but that's the genesis of this request would be why it's here.
So just to clarify, kids on the west side
Side.
of Locust Grove are not in a busing zone for that school?
Correct.
What's the distance? It looks like we're, what, close to a mile?
So, Mr. Chair, yeah, I didn't measure it, but I can let you know. I will channel Miranda here for a second. Actually, if there's sidewalks, kids, elementary age kids are expected to walk up to 1.5 miles before safety busing comes into effect. There are complete sidewalks. It's just this crossing that doesn't exist. So you could walk the sidewalk and get there.
That's still in the Sienna School District.
Again, Mr. Chair, I didn't check this year, but historically this has been within the Sienna district, yes.
They did the boundary drawings 2 years ago. They changed those. I just wonder how long this item's been on the list, I guess is my question.
I can't give you the exact date, but it's been at least a handful of years.
I'm trying to pull up the school district maps for that area on my phone, sorry. Does not appear, anything on the west side of Locust Grove does not appear to be in the Sienna School District. It only encompasses Locust Grove down to, not Locust Grove, Victory south to, I think it's Amity, east to Eagle Road, and then the Thousand Springs subdivision, which is north of Victory Road, is the school district boundary. So that's, yeah, that section to the upper right corner there. So Victory, Locust Grove, so I would be hesitant to put a crossing, I mean, maybe it does make sense to have a crosswalk in there, but if it's for the purpose of the school district, I don't see it as a requirement. I live in Thousand Springs, so I have some perspective on that, I guess.
And again, I didn't verify, you just did, but I didn't, that's why it's been on the list historically, but yeah, if they're no longer in, if it's been redistricted out.
I think we, like, based on that observation, I'd say we move it down to 15, but I would want some confirmation from Miranda, I guess, to confirm my theories there, my research.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lancaster.
So I appreciate that, Commissioner Hall. And Miranda's not here, and we do need to make our list this week. And as I recall, the school district gets to make their own list. So I think we need to not worry too much about what the school district is doing or not doing. But I agree that we should move this down on the list. It doesn't seem, with the information we have currently, it doesn't seem that number 3 on the list is appropriate.
Okay. You had 2 other items, Mr. Lancaster, did you not?
Yeah, number 6 and 10.
And your issue was 6?
So 6 being,
So, Mr. Chair, again, I can.
let's look at it and go.
Yeah, so let me just orient you in some of the history. So Meridian Middle School, Cherry Lane's just off your, so 8th Street, this is a signalized intersection, Cherry Lane, the pedestrian signal that was commented on before. There's a subdivision that will be going in here. Historically, the kids have used this pathway that comes along here, and then 7th Street, and you can actually see there's a striped crosswalk here. The request would be to upgrade that that crosswalk to being a flashing beacon or some other device here. There are parents that will stop and drop their kids off, and otherwise at least there were. Again, some of this is historical information. I haven't talked to anybody this school year about this, but parents will line the street here and make it a tunnel, basically, that you can't, as a car or motorist driving through there, you don't know if there's a kid until they step out in front of that car, and all of a sudden they're right there. So that's been the concern, something overhead that says, hey, there's a pedestrian that would like to cross the street here. yeah, that's kind of the context of the request, is this is a sort of a neighborhood connection to the middle school, and it is my understanding that quite a few middle schoolers do use this crosswalk to get to school, which you can see from the...
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
with that information, so this goes along with what my comment was earlier, and I'll take some rebuttal to what Commissioner Leslie had to say. This does seem like a location where a crossing guard is very appropriate. So it's right in front of the school. So a crossing guard is a long-term solution because, I mean, crossing guards have existed since schools and roads have existed, right? So the advantage of a crossing guard is it's applicable when the demand is present. It's applicable only when the school is in session, right? So this does seem like an appropriate place for a human solution, meaning crossing guard, as opposed to a nuts and bolts infrastructure solution. So I would propose that, well, I'll suggest that we move this one down on the list as well.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
a question. Does anybody know what the policy is for schools to use a crossing guard at a middle school? Is that something they do?
I do know that I've seen a crossing guard on Cherry Lane adjacent to Meridian Middle School, so they have crossing guards there.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Leslie?
I only have anecdotal experience as well, but I'm pretty sure the Meridian Road crossing for Heritage Middle School, I've never seen a crossing guard there. That's a hawk.
I saw one there just driving here today.
Really?
They had a crossing guard there, yeah, right there at Meridian Road and McMillan.
We really need Miranda today. She has all these answers.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, of all days, yes.
Are we getting hung up, does enhanced, does the word enhanced, can that be parsed off to what the best solution is? Whether that's a crossing guard or a mechanical infrastructure issue?
Mr. Chair, I would just say, if it's a human solution, then we don't need to send it to ACHD. That's a school district request. The only reason it's on this list is to be a flashing light, essentially.
I see. Okay, thank you for the clarification. Second dumb question, Mr. Lancaster. Maybe I'm ahead of yours, but okay.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I can add to that, and I think this is pertinent to our conversation. So by law, by state law, all intersections have a crosswalk at them, whether it's marked or not.
Correct.
So whether there's no markings, or there's crosswalk markings, or there's crosswalk markings and signs, or there's crosswalk markings and signs and a hybrid beacon, they're all crosswalks the same. So it's just the level of stuff, right?
Well, to add to the puzzlement, if you had no parking within a certain area so that you didn't have a tunnel, that would also open up the visual. So there's the third permutation to add to that.
Yeah.
So are you still suggesting that 6 ought to be go down or simply stay there for the reason that it's going to be studied further?
I still suggest that it goes down, and if it's studied further, then we can move it on the list next year. And again, the school district's going to have their own list,
All right.
independent of ours.
So can we ask what your issue with 10 is?
I don't remember what my issue with 10 is. That's why I want to look at it.
Installed enhanced pedestrian crossing kind of sounds similar to 6.
So Victory west of Mesa. So here's Victory Road and Mesa. Enhanced pedestrian crossing and curb ramps on Victory Road at Standing Timber. So, this would be, again, a mid-mile, well, not quite the mid-mile, looks like maybe a third of a mile location. This one, I have a little bit less recollection, at least in my memory, of why this request. I get it. There's no, I mean, if you were going to cross, although it's unmarked, this is still a crosswalk. I don't know that there are high pedestrian counts in this area. I will just point out, though, that the aerial is woefully out of date. It's probably the same date, but just rapidly grown in this area. So you envision the rooftops here, but I don't know that anything really has changed. But this is the context anyways for the request. I don't remember.
There would be, is a traffic signal actually going to end up being there? Just based on the number of cars going in and out of there. I mean, as all that gets developed, I can see that.
Well, I think anything's certainly possible in the future, but right now there are no plans to install one at Standing Timber.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think my question here in my notes was, what is this connecting? So, at that previous one, we had where at least it used to be a connection between houses and a school, right? When I look at this, I say, what is it connecting? It seems to be houses to houses. It's not stores to houses or houses to school, right? I don't know what the push would be for this one.
And Mr. Chair, just a little bit on that, and I'm just trying to, I'm not trying to make anything up, but I do know Redtail, we have heard folks in Redtail going to, there's a convenience store here at this location. But again, you've got a crossing here, a signalized crossing here. Same with these folks. I don't know why you couldn't just go to Victory in here. I recognize it's a little bit out of direction, but I'm just saying, in a tractor, you could have the C-store, which I do know that people on this side do use. I'm not trying to legitimize this request. I'm just trying to say there is some neighborhood serving type of uses kind of along Meridian Road here.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
this is my neighborhood. I don't see anybody using that, honestly. I mean, the people from the apartments go to the convenience store a lot, but in my opinion, that's not a real high priority.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tisdale. Little ammunition to move it down there, Mr. Lancaster?
I also suggest we move that one down, yes.
All right. Have you checked off your list of general and specific questions?
I have one more that was added to our list.
Okay.
So this one, it's a little close to home for me. So let's see, number 19. So it's a little bit down on the list, but they have a tendency to come up to the top of the list, and then we get to talk about them next year. But I mentioned this one because this one's in my backyard, in my neighborhood, and it says neighborhood request. So at least by my definition, a neighborhood is a place, not necessarily something that can make a request. So, but being a resident of that neighborhood, I'm going to veto this one, if you will. So this would be crossing an enhanced pedestrian crossing of Meridian Road, across Meridian Road in the vicinity of Settlers Park.
So, Mr. Chair, just a little bit more context on that one, and maybe some of the notes I could have been a little bit more specific about, but this was actually a commissioner request, and Commissioner Leslie has left, but this was one that he actually brought up. To be on the list, so it's unfortunate that he's not here. But I just wanted to daylight that a little bit, that was one of his requests to add to the list.
For transparency, I did not wait until Commissioner Leslie left to bring it up. So if I'd known it was his request, I would have brought it up earlier. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. McKinney.
On this particular crossing, I think the primary concern is that you get a lot of on-street parking for people accessing Settlers Park. Is that correct? You get a lot of people that park on the side of the road, and then they're walking across the street, and that's the concern. When Meridian Road when this section of Meridian Road is widened to its ultimate section, that won't happen. There won't be room on this first on-street parking. Right now, there's kind of a shoulder that people are using for that purpose. However, if we recall our priorities for road widening, this section of Meridian Road is quite a ways down the list. It's going to be another 5-6 years, I think, before this one comes up to be widened. And what that says to me is the pedestrian crossing issue at this location will be with us for a few more years, at least. And so that's, I think, the concern, because you get a lot of cars parked along the side, you get pedestrians walking out from between cars, and you can have, 40 mile an hour traffic right there, and it can be a hazardous situation.
My question, is there not signal, traffic signal at that intersection now?
There is, yep, at the intersection there is. And people just don't like to walk all the way down to the intersection to cross. So that's the primary issue. That sort of off to the right, that.
They want to move it, I read it north of Eustic, they want to move it.
I think right where the arrow is, I think is the intent, is to put it up there, because that's where people tend to be parking. But the the number of vehicles that can fit in that area is limited, maybe 20 vehicles, something like that. So that's kind of the scope of the problem, though, I think.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if I may add, I am quite familiar with the parking at this area, and, well, I live there too. So this dates back to probably 2013, when this commission's predecessor asked the city council to make a recommendation to ACHD to put no parking signs along Meridian Road. So I was the one that made the presentation to the city council back then. So I'm familiar with that topic. And then as far as widening, so Meridian Road is now widened north from the intersection to north of the park entrance. So that was part of the Eustic and Meridian intersection project. And then the other part of that was parking along Eustic Road on the south side of the park. That's also been widened. So most of the parking, on-street parking has gone away, or it went away several years ago with the no parking signs. There is still parking north of the park entrance, kind of from the north of the pond. But again, as a resident of this one, I'd like to veto this from the list.
Mr. Chair, just to piggyback on Commissioner McKinney's comment on where the Meridian Road widening falls out in overall programming at ACHD. So it's not in their 5-year work plan currently, and it will only be widened 3 lanes north of the entrance to Settlers Park. So it won't be a 5-lane roadway, and it's not planned to be widened anytime in the near future. Just wanted to circle back a little bit on that if you were to put a crossing or something in here, it'd probably have a fairly good life cycle, because nothing is planned for this area in the near future.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lancaster,
if I can make one more broad comment.
just one more?
Well, for now.
Go ahead,
Can't
sir.
promise anything. So I've been a little bit critical here today, or maybe a lot critical, of enhanced pedestrian crossings, flashing lights, whatever, because of either the need doesn't exist or because of the number of these pedestrian hybrid beacons. So, when they started coming around Ada County, I thought they were fantastic. I even designed a few as part of my employment. I think I kind of made this comment earlier that they seem to be being overused at this point. We knocked 3 off the list, or at least suggested that 3 be moved down the list. And I'd like to make this suggestion. we're kind of stuck in our land use planning from decisions made, decades, maybe 100 years ago, as far as our grid. We have a 1 mile grid, arterial grid, and so, typically those intersections are signalized every 1 mile, and then what do you do in between? And we are tending to end up with a lot of pedestrian hybrid beacons, right? So we heard, a school ask for a pedestrian hybrid beacon on Meridian Road near Chinden. That would make 2 in that mile. There's other miles where there's 2. Take Meridian Road between, Fairview and Eustic, there's 2. So I'm kind of to the point where I don't want to put any pedestrian hybrid beacons on the list at all. But if they are going to be on the list, I would really like to see them limited to 1 per mile. Because, let's take Meridian 10 miles by 10 miles, or, pick some bounds, if you will. And if you think there's 1 pedestrian hybrid beacon on all sides of all of those 10 square miles, that's a lot. So to be talking about 2 or even more within the same mile seems like a whole lot to me, which leads me to my, that comment of maybe I don't want any, right? So, like I've commented before, let's do these where they make sense, not necessarily just because the phone rings once, right? Or there's an email that comes in once. We've ended up with some that were questionable already. That's kind of some of the background for why I might make some of the comments that I do. So.
Stated otherwise, the data doesn't support these requests.
Not always, yeah.
All right. So we have for consideration then, to recap, excuse me, is there any other comments, questions? All right, so to review the bidding, Mr. Lancaster has suggested that number 1 be moved, number 3 be moved, number 6 be moved, number 10 be moved, and number 19 moved, and by moved I mean down.
Yes.
All right. Mr. Lancaster, is it your pleasure to do them one at a time, or if you do a group motion, does that interfere with individual items?
We can do them all at once. That'd be fine with me.
All right. So what do you suggest, sir?
Are you wanting move them to what number? Is that what you're asking?
I guess that'd be one approach. Probably moving them off the charts, not advisable, but you want to add a decade to
let's move, well, I'll throw this out there. Let's move numbers 1, 3, 6, 10, and 19 to, I don't know, 30 through 35 or something like that.
So you just add 30 to those numbers?
Sure.
Okay. Any discussion, or Mr. Hood?
Just a clarification, please. So number 30, 31, 32, 33, and 34, is that what?
The number, sure. I mean, the number isn't too important to me. I just want to move them down.
Yeah, I need to have a number.
So just add 30 to the existing.
Add 30 to them, or that would make one number 49, and we don't even have a 48. So.
Right. Make them 30 to 34.
And then I guess, Mr. Chair, if I can, if that's, I didn't hear a second yet, and I don't even know if that's a true motion or not, but you did also have a comment that 16 and 17 you would group with 1. So I don't know if you want to address that at the same time, or if there's any.
Actually, yeah.
Not, but.
Sure. So let's do, yes, 16 and 17 it would apply also.
Come again, Mr. Lancaster?
So number 16 and 17 on the list are also tied to number 1. So it wouldn't make sense to move 1 down without moving 16 and 17 down also.
Okay,
Is it your intent also to group those all together as a single item or to keep them as separate items?
They all seem like the same project to me, but
so items 1, 16, and 17 would become a new 1?
or
And would become item
Number 30.
yeah, become number 30, yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
is that up for vote?
Did we already decided to remove 12 and 13 from the list, correct?
Correct.
And then we decided to leave 46 and 47 where they show up based on this just initial placement. And other than that, did we do something with number 5? Were we taking number 5 off?
No, we didn't.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chair, for next year, I'll just see if that shows up on ACHD's roadway list. And if so, I'll make a comment that maybe we remove it from this list if in fact they're going to track it as a roadway project. But yeah, for right now, it's still a community programs project.
All right. So Mr. Lancaster, to keep us, okay. So you've got a motion, you'd say 1, 16 and 17 should be combined, and then that becomes a 30,
Yes.
Correct.
okay? And item 30 would become item 31.
You mean item 3?
Item 3, excuse me.
Yes.
Okay. Item 6 would become item 32.
Yes.
Item 10 would become item 33, and item 19 would become 34.
That sounds fine with me.
Okay,
I'm so moved, yeah.
is there a second?
Second.
All for the vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
That's how the sausage is made.
That's how the sausage is made.
that closes out item 5B. Mr. Lewis, not so fast, you say, Ballard, okay.
Right. I had mentioned earlier, before all of this, that I would like the draft number 7 to move up and the draft number 14 to move up if possible. So I had suggested that the draft number 7 move up to the number 2 position before the number 1 went away. And I had suggested that the draft 14 go to the number 10 position, thinking that north-south pedestrian facility to the east of Meridian Road was a good thing.
Mr. Chairman?
By process of elimination, that would move 7 3 spots up.
Yeah, 7 is already, with the changes we just made, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, with the changes we just made, number 2 becomes number 1, 4 is 2, 5 is 3, and 7 becomes number 4.
So that's probably sufficient then.
And then what was the other one, number 14?
Number 14.
Well, then, let's see, that's 4, 5,
It
6,
had a whole lot of movement,
7.
didn't it? 1, 2, 3.
Number 14 becomes number 8, based on the changes
That
we've
works for me.
already made.
Okay, then I'm fine.
So I got you there in a roundabout way.
He's in a painful way.
Yeah.
So, I didn't mean to jump in. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's great.
all right. So that closes out item 5 then, 5B. All right. New business. We have 3 minutes before the bell, unless we extend. Is that enough time, Mr. Hood, didn't you want to revisit this, you say?
Mr. Chair, it might be good if you all don't mind maybe 10 minutes. I've heard Mr. Hunt's presentation, and I think 5 minutes and maybe a 5-minute Q&A. If you all are willing to extend the meeting till up to a quarter of, I think that would be appropriate so we can knock this out.
Mr. Chairman, I move to extend our meeting to 5:45.
Is there a
second, Mr. Lewis.
Yes. Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Bell rings at 5:45.
Just so I can see everybody a bit better. Thanks all for letting me be here. I just wanted to talk a little bit about some conversations that have been going on with Meridian staff. You may recall last September, I made a presentation before the full city council about potential service enhancements to the city of Meridian, fixed route service enhancements, and they requested that we work with staff on coming up with some concepts of what the next steps for Valley Connect 2.0 would be for Meridian. So that's the main thrust of the conversation tonight.
Yeah.
There's a packet that, or a handout that's going around. But as that's going around, I just wanted to mention we also are in the process of completing an annual report, and so I just wanted to mention a couple of things about that. This isn't in your packet, but we have completed, or excuse me, are in the process of completing an annual report looking at FY18, and kind of the top line measures are that ridership overall is up, although it's a bit of a mixed bag. There's Ada County ridership is down a little bit. Canyon County ridership is up a little bit. Most of that ridership change happened with the increase in service in the Boise State Shuttle downtown. Also, we threw in some new measures that are included in Valley Connect 2.0, and so that fills out some of the report. So just in the interest of time, kind of moving forward through this, was mentioned already that the service or the ridership increase on Harvest Transit was significant, and that's what we're also reporting in our annual report. Something that we're proud about is that across the board, when we look at well, almost universally across the board, when we look at the rideshare programs that we have with the communities, those have been growing, which is good both for the communities and also just as a representation of the amount of travel need that's out there. Last thing that I want to mention before I get to the fixed route for 2020, we just changed service in January, and one of the changes that we made was to Route 42, and it was adjusted to hit some of the growing areas of kind of mid-Meridian. I guess that's on the west side of Meridian. Route 42 is coming down Franklin now, actually would go by the Project Bronco site, serve the Franklin as well as the 10-mile crossing and the development that's there on Overland, make a new connection at the Galaxy, Wahoo's, Roaring Springs. So this is all-day service. It's not very frequent, but it's once an hour roughly throughout the day, Monday through Friday. So we'll be working on marketing those changes to the community and making sure that they're aware of that change. Otherwise, the changes based on initial numbers, system-wide, the ridership response to the changes we made in January have been generally positive, and we're seeing a growth over last year's ridership, which is significant because the year prior we were seeing ridership decline. So there's a several percentage swing in that ridership trend, if it holds. So what I wanted to talk about today is the fixed route transit expansion. So as I mentioned, our task was to prioritize the next Valley Connect 2.0 investment in Meridian, and you may recall that Valley Connect 2.0, what it's doing is it's looking at the gap between where we are right now and where the region has been planning for transportation to be by 2025, and that's what the growth scenario in Valley Connect 2.0 is supposed to represent. How much transit service have we been ostensibly planning for, and what would that mean for the city of Meridian? And what you see in front of you is an example of what the transit mobility could be from the village if that growth scenario were implemented, the number of places that you could get on transit in 15, 30, 45, and 60 minutes. And so you can see that it becomes much more central to the valley from a transit perspective. You can make connections out to CWI, into many parts of Boise, and become much more productive part of the community from a transit perspective. The other couple of things that we looked at with this initial look was trying to make connections within the city of Meridian and make sure that those connections did connect to the region. So when we looked at potential adds, that was one of our criteria, that it be productive and that it be scalable. So could we grow it from maybe a starting investment to something larger? So what we looked at is this connector route it would travel conceptually from 10 Mile either at the Crossroads or at the Franklin or the other apartment developments there that are just on the western edge of Meridian. Travel through Meridian either on Franklin or Pine, serving downtown Meridian where there's high density development going on. How could we connect those locations to both residence and employment centers? Farther to the east, either continuing on Pine Street to connect with Micro 100 or Sensi, Blue Cross of Idaho, and then going up to the village to make a final stop up there at the village. So this would really go east to west across Meridian, serve downtown Meridian. It would serve the main offices of Valley Regional Transit, which is significant for us because it would provide an opportunity for people to take the bus to our offices, which allows them to get access to other resources that are available there. The point of this would be to provide at least peak hour service, so we'd be looking at maybe 14 trips a day, about 7 in the morning, 7 in the afternoon, 30 minutes every 30 minutes from, say, 6 to 9. So these details would be to be worked out, but roughly 3 hours in the morning and evening of service every 30 minutes. It'd connect about 7,000 jobs in the area and about as many residents. So as we have been working with staff, that has been kind of where our focus has been. And so then when we get to costs, there are a couple of considerations. So on the service side, the 3,100 hours, that would be enough for, as we mentioned, about 14 trips a day, 30-minute service in the AM peak period, commute period, and 30-minute service in the PM period. And that would be about 310,000 hours. When we look at what we might be able to generate locally or directly, so that would be fare revenue, this would be up to 8%, which is what our system-wide average is right now. So for budgeting purposes, that would be where we might start. So it would mean we would need to find between 285 and 310,000 in local operating funds to do that. If we wanted to extend that to be all day, so 30 minutes all day, we would roughly double those hours and roughly double the cost. One thing to consider, however, is that right now we're kind of at our capital capacity, meaning in the peak hour, we don't have enough vehicles. We're right at kind of that threshold where we may need to be getting additional vehicles to add more service. And so this is true across the region. We're getting pressure from many of our partners about trying to add peak hour service. And so that means we get into capital conversations kind of right away. So something to consider is if we would focus initial investments on growing the fleet size and also the other passenger facilities. So if we're talking about installing a station there so a station would be like a shelter, bus stop in downtown Meridian, maybe at 10 Mile Crossing and at the village, putting all of those passenger facilities in place first and then following that up with service contributions afterwards. So when we get to the capital costs, we'll look at those real quick. In the interest of time, I'm kind of blowing through this, so I apologize if you've got questions. We'll take them at the end. The capital costs are a bit more nuanced, so sorry for the mini-lined chart here, but there are a couple of things that we discussed with staff, and one of those is if we're talking about increasing our fleet size, we're also considering what we can do to modernize our fleet, and this is in conjunction with the themes that are in Valley Connect 2.0, which is about bringing more people to more places more often, having higher quality service, integrating new technology into that investment. And so we are considering the use of electric vehicles, which is important because not only because they mix better with, say, an environment downtown where you don't have as much noise associated with an electric vehicle. If you had, say, like they do at Flatbread outdoor seating, you don't have as much exhaust coming out. Even with CNG, that's better than diesel, but you don't have as much exhaust coming off those. They mix better with pedestrian traffic. And they also are better aligned with additional innovations like automation, which is another area that we're looking at. So we've included two different line items. One, if we used CNG, that's compressed natural gas, so an additional 2 vehicles of CNG or electric. And these are, again, initial planning level numbers. And then we have the associated pedestrian investments, so shelters and stations, landing pads at stops, and then the bus stop signage. So that would bring, and then when we look, so then the other thing to consider with capital costs is often we leverage those with federal dollars. And so what we're trying to show here is a range of potential costs. We wanted to start with the total, talk about what potential federal funding might be available, and then what's the range, kind of min to max of local funding that we would be looking to acquire. And so the totals are there. If we went with CNG, the total capital investments that we would need to start up the service would be about 1.1 million. With electric, that would be roughly double that, which leads to the follow-up question about how, in other words, if you make that size capital investment, it makes sense to try and get as much service out of that as possible. And so that's another reason why when we're looking at how would we scale that, do we want to do that capital investment just for peak hour service, or does it make sense to extend that throughout the day? Because once you've got the vehicle, our capacity is only in the peak, our capacity constraint, is in the peak hour. We can run that service throughout the middle of the day without additional capital investments. So those are all things that we think about when we say, how do you phase into a project like this? When you say we have to lay out some initial capital and then transition that into service afterward is one way to think about that. So what I wanted to just kind of have in front of you today is a reminder of kind of the schedule that we have gone through to get here. I mentioned the meeting in September. So we worked on establishing kind of the scope and purpose through December and initial concepts with staff January, February, and in front of you today, wanting to take this to in fact, I believe we're on the agenda to go to the city council next Tuesday, so not tomorrow, but a week from there, and then get some public input on what their thoughts are for transit expansion. But we didn't want to get too far ahead of anybody on what we're thinking about, and so I guess I'll stand for any questions. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Questions, Commissioner? Mr. Hunt?
I have a question.
Mr. McKenna?
When we talk about the costs and comparing the minimum and maximum, whether or not there's federal funding and so on, but I mean, the source of these funds is what? It's Valley Regional Transit, right?
The source of the federal dollars?
No, the local dollars.
The local dollars, yeah, we would need to, and Valley Regional Transit is funded by contributions from the jurisdictions we serve. So that comes back to, because Valley Regional Transit doesn't have any direct funding authority, that's why these conversations come right back to the city councils and the jurisdictions that we serve. And so we would be looking for Meridian to contribute that local share.
Okay, so the entire local share would be on Meridian's budget then?
That's how it's presented here, and within the time frame that we have, that's probably kind of where we would be working. But we're working on developing kind of a cost share agreement across the region, so that because not all of, if that bus, for example, say we added 2 buses to the fleet, that's not a benefit exclusively to the city of Meridian. And so we have we're working on a way to try and share all those costs across the region through a cost allocation model.
Okay.
But
and then what determines whether or not federal funding is available and to what extent?
So there's a couple different sources, and there's both what they call formula dollars, which are based on a variety of things, but those are formulaic, so you don't have to there's not a competitive component to that. The problem with that is for the large urban area, which is probably where most of these dollars would come out of, we're pretty much at capacity for our formula dollars. In other words, there's not a lot of federal dollars to match with local dollars in that bucket of money. The other sources would be competitive. The specific grant number is $5339, but it's a competitive pot of money where we would be going out against other projects across the country and competing for those dollars. The match ratios are like 80 to 85% on those minimum. Obviously, if you can overmatch those, they become more competitive. And that's another reason why electric becomes a bit attractive, is because there are additional monies available for implementing of certain technologies that could make our capital dollars go farther still. So it opens up a different competitive pot.
So it becomes more likely to get federal funding if we spend more money to go for electric vehicles.
And it could change, yes, it could change the amount that's necessary for your local share. Because you can combine those two sources.
Right, okay, thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Hunt, Mr. Lancaster?
Mr.
New topic,
Chairman.
new question.
Yeah, new topic, new question. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if, the commissioners are still involved with VRT committees. I'd be interested in your input if you are.
No?
No, okay. But I guess just my comment for Mr. Hunt is, first, thank you for bearing with my long-windedness to get to your presentation. But second of all, thank you for coming. I'm supportive of any transit proposal. Of course, the city council has to figure out a way to pay for that. Fortunately, we don't have to do that. But I appreciate your presentation, and I'm supportive of your efforts. I thank you personally. It seems like you've brought some good energy to the Valley Regional Transit, and am supportive of the efforts of the agency. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very good. Mr. Hunt, you may have heard earlier, we appreciate you visiting today, and there's still an invitation for you to come back another day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair, before you move on that real quick, I know you just offered that Stephen and other, you're fine. Just, we'll let you know we're going to take you up on that offer, because assuming this next Tuesday that we get similar sentiment from the council to go forth, I think some of the tweaks potentially, or some options to the route that's even shown in this handout today, we'd like to vet that through this group a little bit more, and some of the tweaks and things like that. So today was kind of a touch base overview, but in the coming months, expect to hear more from VRT staff. So it may not be Stephen, but we do want to use you all to make recommendations to the council going forward. So
very good, very good. Looking to, that closes out 6, new business. 7, future meeting topics, master mobility map, comprehensive plan update. Next meeting is April 1. No, that's not a joke. And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
School's out. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies. Okay, where we go?